The chilly November gust marked the onset of deer season in Michigan, a time when families and friends packed their gear, headed north, and plunged into the vast wilderness. David Till and Brian Ogunjohn, two childhood buddies, had been eagerly anticipating this excursion for weeks. The two pals had spent their entire lives together in Michigan, bonding over an interest in nature, sports, and adventure. David, 27, was a skilled carpenter who had ambitions to start his own business, and Brian, 28, had graduated from college and was ready to start working. The two were well known for their easygoing dispositions, their infectious laughter that spread like an epidemic, and their unwavering friendship. On November 22, 1985, the two friends departed on a weekend hunting excursion to a White Cloud, Michigan cabin. The cabin was the property of David's family, and for several years it had been a hunting weekend hideaway for David and his buddies when hunting season arrived. They packed their equipment into David's black 1980 Ford Bronco, ready to be gone for a few days, reveling in the hunt and returning home. But by Monday, when neither had called in, their families were in a panic. Phones were left ringing and worry turned into fear. The police first suspected an accident. Michigan's dense forest could be cruel, and getting lost or hurt while hunting was not unheard of. Police organized searches, advising hunters and locals to keep an eye out for the missing men. But the most baffling part of the case was the missing vehicle. Had David and Brian been involved in an accident, their Bronco would have been approximately where the hunting grounds were. Reports placed their vehicle miles away, in Mio, Michigan, where they had no known reason to be. The more the police investigated, the less the pieces fell into place. Weeks passed without leads, and then months. Flyers were posted, tips came in, and the families still clung to hope. But as 1985 was nearing its end, so was any promising lead. The case turned cold, forgotten in the shuffle as just another unsolved missing person. 2 years passed before a break was made from a most unexpected direction. A man named Lloyd had been having an evening drink at a bar one night when he overheard men talking that caused the hairs to rise on his neck. There were men known as the Duvall brothers, and they were bragging, boastfully telling about how they had killed 2 hunters. The Duvall brothers were well known around there. They were bullies, men who made their living on intimidation and violence. The townspeople avoided them, knowing that any confrontation with them could be trouble. They had been arrested a number of times for stealing, poaching, and beating people up, but nothing had ever stuck long enough to get them sent away for good. Lloyd told the story they told that night was horrible. One of the brothers, J.R. Duvall, had gotten into a fight at a bar with 2 hunters. The hunters had beaten him up in public. In retaliation, J.R. gathered his brothers and tracked down the men later that night. They ambushed them, dragged them outside, and brutally attacked them. Then, without pity, they fed their bodies to the pigs on their farm. When Detective Kurt Schramm received this tip, he was skeptical. Men being fed to pigs was something out of a horror movie. But the more he investigated, the more he discovered that one of the Duvall brothers did indeed own a pig farm. These were not your typical pigs. They were enormous, vicious creatures that would eat anything. The theory, once ridiculous, now seemed strangely plausible. Despite the disgusting news, though, the case lacked concrete evidence. No bodies, no witnesses, and no physical evidence put the prosecution in no rush to move. The Duvall brothers went unpunished, untouched by accusation, and the David and Brian families left with no answers. Once more, the case went cold. Years passed and hope disappeared. The families of the missing men struggled, their lives agitated by the uncertainty of what happened to their relatives. And then, during the late 1990s, a detective named Bronko Lesniewski picked up on a rumor about a woman who would never have told everything she knew. Her name was Barb Boudreaux. For months, Bronko made the rounds with Barb, steadily gaining her trust. She was scared. scared of what might happen to her if she spoke. The Duval brothers still loomed over the town like ghosts, and she was well aware of what they might do. But as the weeks passed, she began to confide more. Barb had been with her that evening. She'd seen what happened. Through her tears, she recounted what the Duval brothers did. They went around the two hunters, contorting their faces into ugly scowls of hatred. She endured JR's and Coco's wild swings at baseball bats over and over again, till the men smashed in a reddened heap to the ground. She recalled the desperate screams of David Till, battered, broken, throwing up his arms and begging with his life to be spared. And she remembered Coco's cold, chilling response, "You're a dead mother, Fowler." With one final swing, he crushed David's skull like a pumpkin. Brian Onjan tried to escape, running through the snow in a desperate bid for survival. But they caught him, dragged him back, and mocked him for wetting himself in fear. Then, they finished the job. With Barb's testimony, the case was reopened again. Investigative subpoenas were issued, and she was subpoenaed to testify before a Michigan prosecutor. At first, she hesitated, letting out only fragments of the truth. But in a sudden explosion of raw emotion, she at last admitted to having seen everything. With this critical witness, authorities finally had enough to move forward. In 2003, nearly 2 decades after the murders, JR and Coco Duval were arrested and charged with the killings of David Till and Brian Ognian. The trial was a turning point. The Duval brothers had swaggered around for years, boasting of their crimes, filling the lives of those around them with fear. But in court, their arrogance melted away. The prosecution had them dead to rights. The witnesses came forward, every testimony confirming the ghastly details Barb had provided. The jury heard in revulsion as the atrocities of that night were revealed. It wasn't until November 13th, 2003, that justice was finally had. Coco and JR Duval were both convicted of first-degree murder and given life without parole. Coco and JR were led away from a Michigan prison where they would spend the remainder of their days. For the families of David and Brian, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but not peace. Their loved ones were never found. There were no remains to bury, no graves to visit, only the painful knowledge of what had happened. When Till and Barbara Ognian had fought for nearly 2 decades to see justice served, and though they had succeeded, the emptiness of their loss remained. David and Brian had set out on a hunting trip to seek adventure, camaraderie, and tradition. They got something more than they bargained for by confronting monsters, with monsters who felt they could commit murder and get away with it. But, as it always does, no secret is kept hidden indefinitely. The past came back to haunt them, and the brothers who bragged about their offenses now sit in silence, behind bars forever for fear that they unleashed. With JR and Coco Duval behind bars, the tiny Michigan town that had long existed in the shadow of their power finally exhaled a collective sigh of relief. The brothers' conviction was a victory not just for the families of David Till and Brian Ognian, but for an entire community that had long existed in fear of speaking out against them. For nearly 2 decades, the Duvals had walked among them, above the law, striking fear with every drunken boast, and now they would never know liberty. The trial was brief and pitiless, life imprisonment. They were moved to the Michigan Department of Corrections, their periods of brutality and harassment condensed to the cruel schedule of a jail cell. To 2 men who had lived under the illusion they were above the law, the austerity of their detention was bitter satisfaction. Gone were those nights of depravity in country taverns, the aura of invincibility they had long enjoyed. On the prison wall, they were mere numbers, their bravado taken away, their strength equal to 0. But even when they settled into their fate, neither man ever showed remorse. JR, the attacker, continued to maintain innocence, stating that the entire case against him had been built upon fabrication. He called Barb Boudreaux an attention-seeking liar and accused the legal system of corruption. Coco, the more violent of the two, remained silent for the most part, but when he did talk, it was in anger, not remorse. To them, they had been wrongly treated, found guilty not on evidence but on rumor and betrayal. But no denial could wipe out the fact that they had spoken too freely for too long, and those rumors became evidence that was their ruin. Their family, in the meantime, which had been an unapproachable force in the community, was pariahs. The Duval name, which had once instilled fear, was now synonymous with shame. Their brothers and extended family members who had similarly enjoyed the same reputation for terror were shunned, avoided by townspeople no longer intimidated by them. The reign of fear was over, and the Duval clan, a tight-knit family bound together by violence and loyalty, started to break apart with JR and Coco's downfall. For the Till and Ognejan clans, justice at last, but not healing. Gwen Till, who had nearly 2 decades to search for answers, was in conflict between relief and a deep emptiness. Her son was never going to return home. There was no funeral, no grave to cry over, just the knowledge that his life was ended in unspeakable terror. Barbara Ognejan was equally bereft, unable to continue living knowing that Brian spent his final moments in fear. Both women had spent years dreaming up these different possibilities, an accident, a kidnapping, even the distant chance that their sons had lived somewhere, somehow. But to know what had actually happened, however terrible, eliminated all doubt and left only sorrow. The town of Mio, where David and Brian had marched into their deaths unaware, was still haunted by the case. For years there had been whispers about the Duvals, overheard bits of rumor, seen bruises and bloodstains that never seemed to be explained. But fear had kept them quiet. Now they grappled with the guilt of knowing that if someone had spoken up sooner, 2 innocent men might still be alive. And as for Barb Boudreaux, the woman whose words had finally burst the case open, there was turmoil in her life after trial. She had spent years harboring secrets from the murders, fearful of speaking, afraid of revenge. When she finally jumped and spoke out, she was heroine and warning. Some cheered her on for being courageous, while others asked why she waited so long. During the quiet hours of the night, she grappled with guilt for not speaking up, wondering if she might have been able to get justice sooner. The David Till and Brian Ognejan case would go on to become one of Michigan's best-known cold cases converted to convictions. It was a lesson in perseverance, a show that no case was ever impossible. Police officers who had spent years investigating the case considered it a tough victory, a testament to the fact that perseverance, even when faced with detours, could finally be rewarded with justice. Years passed and the Duval brothers remained in prison, their legend forgotten. They were no longer those swaggering men who entered taverns discussing murder, no longer the boogeymen of Mio. They were just another cautionary tale now, tough men who had mistaken fear for power and had ultimately been brought to book. For David Till's and Brian Ognejan's families, life would never be the same. They had called for justice, and they had achieved it. But their victory was bitter. Sons they had loved were lost, their laughter stilled, their futures taken from them. But in the end, they had ensured that their names, their stories, would never be forgotten. The David Till and Brian Ognejan case is a sobering reminder of the evil that can be found beneath faces that otherwise appear ordinary. It is a case of brutality, silence, and terror, but also of determination, justice, and a voice to be heard. For nearly 2 decades, their families fought against adversity, never losing faith in their loved ones. Ultimately, they demonstrated that the most diligently entombed secrets can be unearthed, and that justice, however tardily, can nonetheless be meted out. The pointless loss of these two young men is a lesson for every community around the world. Silence leads to violence. Fear is what allows evil to flourish. The capacity to speak out, to speak of what you know, and to be prepared to fight for what is right can be the difference between justice and impunity. If you or someone in your family has information about a crime that is still unresolved, don't delay. Speak out. Seek justice. Speak on behalf of the voiceless whose voices can no longer be heard. For the truth, no matter how expertly hidden, always rises.
Just outside the city limits, where the road narrows and the streetlights fade, a set of railroad tracks carves through the landscape. Beyond them lies a neighborhood rarely spoken of, a patchwork of trailer parks, prefab homes, and quiet struggles. Life here is simple, sometimes hard, often overlooked. It was here, in August 1996, that an 18-year-old girl named Jamie Weiss lived with her boyfriend, Billy Charles. Their home was a modest two-bedroom mobile unit, nestled between other homes just like it. Inside those walls, life played out as it often does for young couples, moments of love, moments of tension, and the kind of dreams that stretch far beyond their surroundings. Jamie was young, full of life, with a gentle kindness that drew people to her. She had a love for music, a natural way with people, and a deep devotion to her 2-year-old son, Jesse. She had dreams, like any 18-year-old, dreams of a better future, dreams of giving Jesse the life she never had. But those dreams would never come to pass. On the morning of August 7th, 1996, the quiet of the neighborhood was disturbed by Mother's desperate search for her daughter. Lisa Charles, Billy's sister, had plans to meet Jamie that day. She called once, then again. No answer. It was unusual. Jamie was always home, especially in the mornings. Growing concerned, Lisa reached out to Dora, Jamie's mother. She, too, hadn't heard from Jamie. Minutes later, Lisa arrived at the mobile home. She knocked on the front door. No response. Then, from around the side of the house, a small figure appeared, Jesse, Jamie's 2-year-old son. Lisa picked him up, her heart pounding. "Where's Mommy?" she asked. The toddler's answer was simple. "She's asleep." But Jamie wasn't asleep. Lisa stepped inside, the house eerily still. Moving through the narrow hallway, she heard it, water running. In the bathroom off the main hall, she found Jamie Weiss submerged in the bathtub. Water splashed across the floor, dripping down the sides of the tub. Jamie's body lay still, naked, her skin pale. Panic surged through Lisa. She turned off the faucet, reached for Jamie, pulling her partially out of the tub. Her mind screamed at her to do something, but it was too late. The girl in her arms was gone. Moments later, Jamie's mother, Dora, arrived at the house, only to be met with Lisa's screams. Hysteria filled the small home as Dora rushed inside, finding her daughter lifeless. Paramedics were called. When they arrived, they confirmed what was already known. Jamie Weiss was dead. The initial assumption was tragic, but simple. An accident. A young mother had slipped in the tub, perhaps hit her head, drowned. But the autopsy told a different story. Jamie Weiss had not drowned. There was no water in her lungs. Instead, the medical examiner found bruises along her body, marks of a struggle, signs of a beating. Jamie had been attacked. She was dead before she ever hit the water. This was no accident. This was murder. But by whom? Detectives turned their attention to the scene. There was no sign of forced entry, no shattered glass, no broken locks. Everything was in place, the house clean and undisturbed. Even the family's pit bull, known for its protective nature, had made no sound. This wasn't the work of a stranger. Then, in the bedroom, detectives found something. A pair of pants and sneakers belonging to Billy Charles, both stained with blood. When questioned, Billy had an explanation. He had suffered a nosebleed the night before, a common problem due to allergies. The blood, he claimed, was his own. But detectives weren't convinced. They searched further. In the bottom of a clothes hamper, they found some of Jamie's clothes, still damp. Inside Billy's truck, a stack of white towels, wet, as if they had been used to clean something. Billy was brought in for questioning. Sitting across from the detective, he was calm. When pressed about the inconsistencies, his demeanor changed. He became defensive. "If you think I did it," he said, "arrest me." He asked for a lawyer, and the interview ended. Without hard evidence, police had little to move forward with. The case stalled. A year passed. Jamie Weiss's murder became another cold case, buried under the weight of unanswered questions. But detectives weren't ready to give up. On the one-year anniversary of Jamie's death, they tried something bold. They placed a hidden microphone near Jamie's grave, hoping that Billy Charles, their prime suspect, might return, might speak to the girl he had once loved, might confess. And Billy did come. He knelt beside the grave, lay down against the earth, and spoke. His words were soft, inaudible to anyone but Jamie. When police retrieved the microphone, anticipation was high, but when they pressed play, all they heard was static. The one chance at a confession was lost to silence. Frustrated, detectives turned to outside help. In November 1999, they presented the case to the Vidocq Society, a group of criminal experts known for solving the unsolvable. The room filled with questions. Was the fingerprint on the shower curtain analyzed properly? Were vacuum tests done for trace evidence? Could there have been an error in the DNA analysis? One suggestion stood out. The vaginal swabs from Jamie's autopsy had been processed incorrectly. The separation between semen and vaginal fluids had been flawed, possibly skewing DNA results. Detectives ordered new testing, but as months passed, the results remained inconclusive. Then, in April 2000, police revisited the crime scene evidence. Carpet swatches from the mobile home were brought back under examination. Using advanced forensic lasers, they detected hidden stains, possibly blood, possibly evidence of a cleanup attempt. Samples were sent for further testing. If DNA could be extracted, it might be the final piece of the puzzle. But once again, the results were inconclusive. Another 5 years passed. By 2005, Jesse, the son Jamie left behind, was now 9 years old. Billy Charles still lived in the community, still under suspicion, but never charged. Detectives continued to question themselves. Had they been too focused on Billy? Had they missed something? But the evidence, what little there was, always led back to him. Then, in 2012, 16 years after Jamie's death, a breakthrough. Advances in forensic technology allowed for reanalysis of old evidence. DNA from the carpet, the clothes, and the towels was retested. The results were clear. The blood was Jamie's. The pattern was consistent with a beating. Billy Charles was arrested. At trial, prosecutors laid out their case. The night before Jamie's death, neighbors had heard arguing. The next morning, Billy's clothes were covered in blood, Jamie's body placed in the tub to stage an accident. Billy denied it all, but the evidence was overwhelming. In 2013, he was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. For Jamie's family, there was relief, but no victory. No sentence could bring her back. Billy's family remained divided. Some insisted he was innocent. Others, in quiet voices, admitted they had long suspected the truth. Jesse, now grown, never knew his mother. The memories he had were borrowed from stories, from photographs, from the pain in his grandmother's eyes. And so, the case of Jamie Weiss was finally closed. Justice delayed, but justice at last. Jamie Weiss was just 18 years old, a young mother with dreams of a better future, a life stolen before it could truly begin. For years, her case remained cold, her family left with unanswered questions, and a community divided by suspicion. But through persistence, forensic advancements, and the unwavering determination of investigators, justice was finally served. Billy Charles was convicted, but the sentence could never undo the pain inflicted on Jamie's family. For them, the loss will always remain. Yet her story serves as a reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, is always worth pursuing. Cold cases like Jamie's still exist, families waiting, hoping for closure. If you have any information on an unsolved case, speak up. The truth is out there, and sometimes all it takes is one voice to bring justice to the forgotten.